y'all! In part 1, we covered electromagnetic radiation and how it can seriously fuck your shit up, especially UVB, UVA, and visible light. So now we know what the sun's light can do to us, how that actually works, and we've got terms to describe the types of protection that we've got. But what forms does that actually take? Of what is our valiant shield against the sun's destroying flames made? Let's start with the actual sunscreen filters. They're oftentimes the most easily recognizable things on the sunscreen label, either cited as the active ingredients or having really long and complicated names. There are 2.5 kinds of sunscreen filters: mineral sunscreens, or as many people like to call them, physical. And then you have organic, or as some people like to call them, chemical sunscreens. The problem with the terms physical and chemical is that neither one is accurate. When you hear the term physical sunscreens, what that means is either zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And what some people will tell you is they physically reflect and scatter incoming light. Then you have chemical filters, which are chemicals. The way they are laid out in terms of their molecular structure is they've got these amazing alternating double and single bonds between their carbon atoms, and that allows them to absorb the incoming sunlight's energy, which excites their electrons. But then that energy has to go somewhere, so it gets released as heat. And ne'er the twain shall meet. Well, anyone who says that is completely and totally wrong. First of all, chemical sunscreens are also physical, otherwise they would be incorporeal. That would make sunscreen even harder to apply. Not only can I not see it, I can't touch it. What is this, a sunscreen for ghosts? And then physical sunscreens are also chemicals. Zinc oxide is a chemical. Titanium dioxide is a chemical. These are chemical compounds. So this distinction doesn't actually make any sense. The one that scientists generally prefer is that of organic for the chemical sunscreens versus inorganic for the physical. Why is that? Well, in terms of chemistry, organic means anything that is carbon-based. Inorganic means anything that doesn't have carbon. This can also be a source of confusion, unfortunately, because of the labeling of things as organic to some might signify raised without pesticides or something. I'm not entirely sure because there is no one global standard for what the term organic actually means. That's an entirely different video, though. You can also say mineral sunscreens if you like, to distinguish between organic and inorganic. Unfortunately, labeling something inorganic would probably cause a lot of customers to become disinterested in it because of the obscure meaning of that word. Also, the way that inorganic versus organic sunscreens work is basically the exact same. What? Mineral sunscreens don't just literally reflect all of the sunlight? First of all, think about what that would look like if people who went out wearing mineral sunscreens, if their faces were reflecting all of the sun's light, like 100%, your face would be some kind of laser death ray. While it's true that they reflect and scatter some light, it's mostly only at the tail end of UVA and some visible light. Most of how they work is just absorbing the energy and releasing it as heat, the exact same way as the organic chemical sunscreen filters. I should also point out, this isn't a bad thing. There have been rumors that the amount of heat being released by sunscreen is causing your skin to age somehow, or making your acne worse, because being overheated can sometimes exacerbate acne problems. But again, keep in mind just how itty bitty teeny tiny these bits of light are. There's absolutely no evidence that absorption and release of the sun's energy as heat is in any way detrimental for your skin. There's also a third type of sunscreen filter that is neither physical nor chemical exactly. They're a hybrid, an organic compound that contains particles that can scatter the light. These are the Tinosorb filters. There's Tinosorb S, Tinosorb M, and Tinosorb A2B. They generally get classed with the organic sunscreens though, so that's how I'm going to talk about them in this video. One of the nice things about mineral sunscreen filters is that there are literally only 2 of them. Yes, that's right. There's zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. We've already talked about how they work, but what are they like in terms of consumer satisfaction? Let's list some pros and some cons. They are way less likely to irritate your skin and especially your eyes compared to organic sunscreen filters. Zinc oxide is oftentimes found in things like diaper rash cream or Cica creams, or basically anything that's meant to heal broken or damaged skin. In a sunscreen, it can actually be really helpful to sensitive or acne-prone skin to kind of help calm all of that down. So you might think, mineral sunscreens, they're so great, why would anybody choose anything else? They're not gonna irritate your skin. Well, on the con side, they have a gross, disgusting, horrible zombie-like white cast. I have relatively light skin, and it can be really, really bad on me. If you have much melanin at all, putting white minerals directly on your skin can make you look ashy or like one of the undead, and that's generally no good, especially on your face, the part of you that most people interact with. Also, much like diaper rash cream, mineral sunscreens can be really like thick and greasy and just have a very unpleasant texture. They can be hard to spread out on your skin, and in order to get them to look less white and horrifying, you may have to really just work that in. Mineral sunscreens, they can also be weirdly dehydrating on the skin. I don't know if it's they actually dry you out or if it's just that they dry out those upper layers of skin. Mineral sunscreens seem to make any dry or flaky patches on your skin much more visible. I've experienced this countless times. There's also the fact that it's hard to get really good UVA protection out of mineral filters. What do I mean? Well, titanium dioxide covers UVA 2, but nothing in the UVA 1 region. Zinc oxide covers the entire spectrum, UVB, UVA 2, and UVA 1. The problem is, I'm going to show you this graph. So here's the spectrum, and you can see that it covers it, but the coverage itself is not great. We're looking at the amplitude, which is under the line of the graph. So you really have to pack a lot of zinc oxide into your sunscreen if you're going to get any UVA-1 protection at all, and that generally compounds the problems of texture and white cast. Mineral sunscreens have some serious problems, even with more advanced technologies that allow you to coat the mineral particles and make them spread out more easily, sink into your skin more easily, and be less visible. On the other hand, we have the organic sunscreen filters. Now, since they aren't made out of metal, then they generally have less of a white cast or no white cast at all. The Tinosorbs, the hybrid filters, do have at least some white cast, in particular Tinosorb M, but it seems to be easier for manufacturers to make a sunscreen with those products in it that doesn't have a white cast, or at least doesn't have much of one. And of course, some of them have absolutely no white cast at all, which is wonderful. They also tend to have a much more cosmetically elegant texture, meaning it feels nice on your skin and you're less likely to notice that you're wearing sunscreen in the first place, which of course makes it easier to wear day in and day out. It's going to be awfully hard to motivate yourself to wear sunscreen every day if you absolutely freaking hate this gray, joyless paste that makes you look like a shambling revenant. Also, chemical filters provide some of the absolute best UVA protection that there is, and you don't have to use all that much of them, depending on the filter. What about the downsides? Well, a lot of that can be summed up under the heading of the older chemical filters almost universally suck. They are much more likely to irritate your skin and eyes than mineral filters. Some of them are less than photostable. Octinoxate and avobenzone in particular, unless avobenzone is stabilized by another organic sunscreen filter, then it very rapidly loses its ability to protect you from the sun at all, which is crazy to me. We've got this amazing sunscreen. However, you cannot wear it in the sun. Finally, in terms of cons, there is the stink. Yeah, chemical filters do not smell good, or at least a lot of them don't smell good. And I'm not talking about a kind of mild, unpleasant waft that goes away really quickly. Some of them got stank on them, like, oh god. La Roche-Posay sunscreens are particularly bad for this. To me, they smelled like burned rubber. I'm not sure what chemical filter that is, but gross. This leads to manufacturers filling them full of fragrances and, unfortunately, essential oils. So yikes, is there anything good to say about chemical sunscreen filters other than the lack of white cast? Well, yeah, actually. So here's the last pro on the list. Most of those problems don't apply to the newest generation of organic filters. What are some organic filters? There are an absolute ton of them, but some of the most common ones you may have heard of are avobenzone, which protects from UVA, octinoxate, octocrylene, and oxybenzone, all of which protect from UVB and a little bit of UVA2. These are all older filters, and they're the ones that all of the cons absolutely apply to. They're not particularly photostable, they can be extremely irritating. Avobenzone, for one, just stings my eyes like nobody's business. Some of the chemical filters that you may not have heard of are things like Uvinol A+, Uvinol T150. There's the Tinosorbs, and then there's the Uvasorbs, like Uvasorb HEB. These are all really, really great chemical filters that are not absorbed by the body, that do not show any hormonal disruption effects, and they have little to no white cast. Newer organic filters can be absolutely amazing in terms of sun protection. Also, some of them, especially UV-Absorb HEB, are amazingly photostable, losing less than 10% of their protection in over 24 hours. But speaking of physical and chemical, it's time to count down on the 10 biggest myths about sunscreen. Number 1. As I have alluded to, there are a lot of people who have very bad impressions of organic sunscreen filters. Because they are synthesized in labs, they oftentimes are unfairly demonized by people who fall into the naturalistic fallacy, the idea that anything that comes from the natural world is inherently better than things that are evilly synthesized in the laboratory dungeons of man whose reach exceeds his grasp. And that is obviously complete and total crap. It's called a logical fallacy for a reason. This idea that zinc oxide and titanium dioxide are better for your skin, less harmful overall, and offer far superior protection. None of that is true. The idea that organic sunscreen filters are very bad, very dangerous things is going to be the subject of a lot of these myths, by the way. So first of all, the zinc oxide and the titanium dioxide that you get in your sunscreens does not come from nature. It is synthesized in labs. And that's because the mineral, like for zinc oxide, for example, called zincite, real imaginative there, guys, is usually tainted with minerals that can cause poisoning. You don't want the most natural version of zinc oxide. You don't want to just go out and grab a rock and rub it on your face. That's not how sun protection works. The natural compounds in physical sunscreens are actually man-made, and we are all better for it. Secondly, there's nothing unnatural about synthetic chemical compounds. Unless you are literally using supernatural means of producing your sunscreen, I guess that would make it a supernatural or an unnatural. The dark side of the Force creates sunscreens that some might call unnatural. There's nothing inherently bad or unnatural or destructive about organic sunscreen filters. There are some people who even object to the idea of sunscreen at all, that we need to absorb all the sunlight because it's more natural. You know what also is natural? Not surviving appendicitis. Thank you. I will skip all that. Related to the naturalistic fallacy, number 2. Yeah, trying to make your own sunscreen is a terrible idea. There's a lot of reasons why, starting with the fact that a lot of people are under the impression that various oils have SPF. Carrot seed oil is a big one, so is raspberry seed oil, olive oil, coconut oil. These are all things that people say have a sun protection factor. There's no evidence for this, that various natural oils can protect your skin better than sunscreen. Testing has been done to see if there is any truth to this, and no, oils can offer you some protection, but it's like an SPF of maybe 7 at the maximum, but probably it's an SPF of 1. I don't know about you, but I don't want to trust my skin to that when I'm going outside. Anything that oils are doing for your skin in terms of lessening sunburn is probably, a lot of them have anti-inflammatory properties, so that can help with the after effects of sun exposure, but it's really not going to do much to actually protect you from getting damage. So there's the oils, and then there's the idea that you just take a nice mix of these oils and you just dump a bunch of diaper rash cream or anything containing zinc oxide in there and wham! Instant sunscreen. That's not how this works. Inorganic mineral sunscreen filters are a suspension of particles. The size of the particles matters immensely. Not just the size of the particles, but what they're coated in. As part of the process of making synthetic zinc oxide specifically for sunscreen, a lot of the time it's coated in other chemicals so that it can go on your face more smoothly, and also to reduce the white cast that comes from rubbing white minerals on your face. The zinc oxide that you're gonna find in a diaper rash cream is not gonna cut it for that, and the size of the particle affects how it can absorb or scatter light. Sunscreen is really difficult to formulate, and this is part of why. You have to have the right size of particles as well as the right amount of particles. Just mixing together something that will give you an eventual percentage of 10 to 15% of zinc oxide and then slapping a label of SPF 50 on it is all kinds of not good. Just merely on an aesthetic level, the idea of being covered in coconut oil mixed with diaper rash cream sounds terrible, and I don't know why anyone would voluntarily do that to themselves. Like, why not rub some pizza grease all over your face while you're at it? Then there's the fact that this is really unlikely to work. Any protection that you could get from zinc oxide in that form is going to be really patchy. There's probably also going to be some false confidence at play. You enslime yourself with this disgusting concoction, and now you think, I am protected from the sun, so you can go out into the sun. You might not come out of it with the sunburn, depending on whether or not you were out in the shade, but odds are you've done a lot of UVA damage to your skin. These sorts of DIY sunscreens, you see them a lot on like mommy blogs, but also religious fundamentalist doomsday preppers. If there's one piece of advice you take away from this video, it's don't accept information on health from people who think that vaccines cause autism, that cell phone towers have caused the coronavirus epidemic, and that the moon is a hologram made by Satan. Yeah, I'm not making that up. There are people who really believe that shit. Myth number 3. Aren't there all these studies that show that organic sunscreen filters absorb through your skin and they go into your blood and then they go straight into your genitals and they ruin them forever and also the genitals of your future children? Well, no, not really. So the truth is that a few old chemical filters have hormonal disruption effects in fish and mice and cells on a plate. And those fish and mice were exposed to way, way higher levels of those sunscreen filters than any human being could reasonably be expected to encounter in the entirety of their life. Like all those studies from the 1970s where they were like, we've replaced all of this mouse's blood with Sweet and Low, and shockingly, it became cancerous and then died. I'm surprised it didn't fucking burst into flame. You really can't tell what's gonna happen to a human being based on what happens to mice or fish. The older chemical filters that you should probably steer away from, if you're really worried about this, oxybenzone and octinoxate. These two bad boys do exhibit hormonal disruption effects in these limited circumstances, but isn't there some danger in these sunscreens? If you're using it every day, maybe if you were like literally chugging a bottle of the stuff every day for the next 30 years of your life, then yeah, you could probably expect to see some hormonal issues. You're probably gonna have problems with diarrhea too. The main issue with organic sunscreen filters is that some of them, the old-fashioned ones, can be really irritating to people's skin and to their eyes. Some studies show that some chemical filters build up in the bloodstream. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's absolutely no evidence that even when that happens, that it's causing negative long-term effects on our health. And it's not all organic filters, it's a limited number of them, and they're all the oldest and generally the crappiest. Oxybenzone is generally on the way out as a sunscreen filter in the civilized world, mostly because it's just so irritating. There is no reason to be afraid of organic sunscreen filters. They're not gonna cause a massive wave of Jurassic Park style gender transformations in people, okay? That's not how this stuff works. There's no evidence that that's ever actually happened to a person. What we do have evidence of is them protecting your skin from the deleterious effects of the sun. Myth number 4. Yeah, that's right. There are people out there who literally think that the use of sunscreen is making the global rate of skin cancer go up. The rate of skin cancer is increasing globally. However, there is no evidence to tie this to sunscreen use. We actually do have plenty of evidence that regular sunscreen use every day not only doesn't ruin your genitals, but it does slice your rates of skin cancer, squamous cell cancers by 40% and melanoma by 50%. So we do actually know that sunscreen prevents skin cancer. We know that. There is no evidence that sunscreen is actually engendering skin cancer. Where did this rumor come from? Probably because some older chemical filters, again, are not the most photostable and they can degrade when exposed to the sun. When they degrade in the sun, they can form reactive oxygen species, damage your DNA and give you cancer. But again, there's no evidence that this actually happens. In fact, the thing that's probably causing the increase in skin cancer globally is the consumption of citrus fruit. Yeah, that's right. There's some really good science out there that shows that as more and more people are consuming more and more citrus fruit, it's causing you to get skin cancer. How? Those citrus essential oils, which are terrible to put on your skin, have terrible effects on your DNA when exposed to sunlight. Sunscreen is not giving people cancer. The only way you can kill somebody with sunscreen is if you jam a bottle of it down their throats, which is admittedly sometimes what I am tempted to do when I hear people say, "Oh, I have to fear for my life from this sunscreen. Oh, no." Number 5. So this is a very well-intentioned idea. We want to save the planet, and we can do it by rejecting sunscreen, specifically all of those chemical filters. Well, again, this is one of those things where stuff that is done to cells on a dish is not the same thing as stuff that happens in the real world. There is evidence that older chemical filters and the nano-sized versions of mineral sunscreens cause damage to coral reefs, that they cause coral bleaching and can cause the coral to die. Obviously, coral bleaching is a huge environmental crisis. There is, however, no scientific evidence at all that this has ever happened in the real world. And the reason is probably that compared to the amount of sunscreen that goes in there, the ocean is so big. It is beyond big. It is literally tough to express in words just how big the ocean is. The only places where that might be an issue would be atolls and places that don't see all that much water circulating. That's another thing the ocean does, is that the water moves around. It doesn't just stay in one place so it can dump any toxic particles on just one area and then let it stew and ferment there. That's not how this works. Most scientists agree that the thing that's actually causing coral bleaching is climate change. And climate change is generally brought about not by our individual actions, but by the actions of large corporations, who pollute because it allows them to do the things they do for cheaper. Your use of sunscreen, even organic sunscreen filters, is not contributing to coral reef death. If anybody tries to tell you otherwise, kick them in the shins. Myth number 6. Since we do need sunlight to kickstart the process of our bodies making vitamin D, doesn't it figure that if you block the sun's rays from hitting your body, then you're going to prevent vitamin D synthesis? Well, as it turns out, that's not true. Why? Because most people don't actually apply enough sunscreen, and they don't apply it evenly all over their faces, necks, etc. There's all sorts of places on our bodies that we miss, oftentimes like our lower legs and our feet, our ears, parts of our necks, especially like the back of our neck, the place where you part your hair on your scalp. Most people aren't putting sunscreen there, and that's really all it takes in order for your body to make the vitamin D that it needs. However, let's say that it's true that if people were dying of rickets because they were covering themselves in sunscreen, which again, there's no evidence that this has ever happened, not even once. Vitamin D is really easy to supplement. I get these giant bottles of this stuff off of Amazon. I take this because it helps with my depression issues, especially since I live in northern Alberta where sunlight can be pretty scarce. In fact, at least a third of people in North America are vitamin D deficient. Can I just say vitamin D deficient? Unless you live right around the equator, a vitamin D supplement is probably a great idea anyway. Even if you are literally capable of blocking absolutely every bit of UV radiation from touching your body, you can still get vitamin D in supplement form. It's not difficult, and these things are frigging delicious. You have to work really hard not to just eat the entire bottle. And secondly, it's hard to poison yourself with. So yeah, vitamin D, great for supplementation and not prevented from forming by sunscreen. Next myth. I like to think that everything I've said will show just how silly this idea is, but it's pretty persistent. And why it's persistent is because people with darker skin do have some measure of protection from the sun compared to people with lighter skin. However, that's your natural God-given melanin, and that is great. What is not great is darkening your skin artificially through sun exposure. In order to get that protective tan, and yes, the tan does have a very small amount of sun protection, but you had to damage your DNA and suppress your immune system in order to get it. You do not have to damage your DNA and suppress your immune system to have naturally dark skin. And tanning beds are especially pernicious when it comes to this kind of thing because they use UVA rays. So not only are you blasting yourself in the face with something that's going to give you melanoma and visible signs of aging, but the tan that it causes actually doesn't provide protection in the same way that a tan caused by UVB does. Doubly screwed! Myth number 8. There's a lot of makeup products that have some form of sunscreen in them, and I absolutely hate that. The amount of makeup that you would need to glop onto your face to equal the recommended amount of sunscreen is going to look fucking terrible. That's the thing about the SPF. That number relies entirely on you applying the right amount all over your face. If I used as much foundation as I do sunscreen, I would look like some kind of horrifying revenant equivalent of Mary Kay sales ladies from the 1980s. It's gonna be a cakey, nightmarish mess. I know Supergoop, which, Supergoop. I know they have a glowy makeup primer sunscreen that, first of all, it's only an SPF 40, but also it's a glowy primer. Most people aren't going to put that much of it on their skin because they don't want to look like a demon-possessed disco ball. Also, this is one of those things that absolutely does create false confidence. This idea that, oh, I put on a bit of foundation with SPF in it, I'm good for the entire day. No, that's bad. Rely on sunscreen, put your makeup on top of it. It doesn't hurt to have a little extra protection from your makeup, but that should never replace an actual sunscreen that was made to be a sunscreen. There's also a lot of sunscreen powders out there, and again, the amount of powder that you would have to use on your face is gonna make you look like some dough-encrusted monster. Cakey ain't the half of it. Those are good for blotting your skin and adding a little bit of extra UV protection, maybe even setting your makeup, but it shouldn't replace an actual sunscreen. Also, generally there's not much in the way of UVA protection, it's just the SPF. So you're doubly not getting the kind of protection that you might think is available based on the number that's on the bottle. Number 9. This is a more recent bone of contention, especially in the skincare community. People in North America are finally learning about how awesome sunscreen can be. There's a predictable backlash. This idea that unless you're only thinking about protecting yourself from skin cancer, that's the only acceptable reason for using sunscreen. If you want to use it to protect yourself from the ravages of age, you're stupid and shallow and you're just like the other girls. Didn't we already deal with this schism at the end of the second wave of feminism? Are there a lot of ads in magazines that have been overly airbrushed to try and sell this ideal of perpetual youth? Do we have a youth-focused culture? Yes, that is all true. But at the same time, it doesn't make you a vapid idiot to want to protect yourself from aging. Also, it goes hand in hand with protection from melanoma and not suppressing your immune system. I plan on clinging to my youth for as long as possible until around like age 85, at which point I want to go full Baba Yaga. Myth number 10. As with any other kind of skincare product, there's a lot that can go wrong with sunscreen. A lot of this is problems with old sunscreen. A lot of sunscreens only used to be mineral-based, meaning they were gross and white casty and greasy and disgusting. And then when chemical filters came along, some of the older ones, well, they can be irritating to your skin, like oxybenzone. They can make you break out. They can sting your eyes. And so it seems like there's a big public perception that sunscreen is just this drudgery that you have to endure day after day. That sunscreen is just really unpleasant to use, and that leads people to not wear it when they should. Thankfully, newer sunscreens, especially sunscreens from Western Europe, Korea, and Japan, have completely redefined what sunscreen is like. Sunscreen does not have to suck, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune, so if you've tried sunscreen before and had it break out your skin, or where it just looked terrible on you, I beg you, give sunscreen a second chance. But I don't know which sunscreen to pick. And when you do figure it out, how much do you apply? How do you apply it? Are you supposed to reapply it literally every 2 hours? Well, all of that is coming in part 3, in which I will discourse at length on all of the above topics. See you soon, y'all!